Hello everyone and welcome back to Stolen From Me. With every episode I cover, a viewer discretion is always advised. My channel isn't recommended for children due to the nature of our content that we cover, and today's episode is no different. This is the heartbreaking case of 12-year-old Tia Rigg. Now, before I start, I just want to make it clear that every episode that I cover on my channel right from day one, I've always tried to make sure that the victim is the most important person in every single episode. I try to show this, and I think my channel reflects that. I don't like to glamorize or highlight the perpetrator, and I definitely don't like to give them a voice. I really don't think that they deserve one. However, this wasn't possible in this episode, and this is one of the reasons I never covered this episode. But I do think it's important to give Tia a voice. So this has very limited information on Tia. I have found as much as I could, but please keep in mind that Tia is the most important person in this episode. Thank you. Tia Rigg lived in Salford in Manchester. She was a bright, happy 12-year-old girl. She attended Albion High School and she had a trusted group of friends she regularly hung around with. Tia was described as a free spirit. She was kind and caring with an infectious personality. Tia loved football, and her favourite football team in the whole world was Manchester United. She loved them. Lynn, Tia's mum, said that Tia was always happy. You never saw her sad. Lynn Ahmed had 3 children before Tia. They would go on to live with another family member due to Lynn not being able to provide a safe environment for her children. Lynn would then go on to fall pregnant again, but this time, even before her unborn baby entered the world, the unborn child was placed on the Child Protection Register. Lynn and her partner, Lee Rigg, welcomed their daughter Tia into the world on the 4th of January, 1998. Lynn would go on to have 3 other children after Tia, and they was also placed on the same Child Protection Register as their sister, and for the same reason. It's believed social services stated that Tia and her siblings were most likely to suffer neglect. But this would be changed later on to most likely suffer physical abuse. Yet the children were able to stay in the care of their mother. In 2001, Tia was removed from the Child Protection Register, and she was not placed back onto it until 2004, despite concerns of domestic abuse. I didn't see, but I actually think that that would have meant all of the children. But because I was reading up on Tia, it only gave me information on Tia. And obviously the children's identity was protected. Lynn had a very troubled life. It's believed that Tia went to live with another family member, I think it was her auntie. But due to some kind of argument, Tia returned home to the care of her mother in October 2008. The following May, the Child Protection Review decided that the Child Protection Plan would be discontinued. As well as a troubled home, Lynn was involved with Class A drugs, and there was also an issue of violence in the home. It's believed that Tia would be left home alone to look after her siblings on many occasions. Lynn had previously been in prison a couple of times, and this was for robbery and assault. It's also said that Lynn had tried to take her own life. She was struggling with mental health issues and a drug addiction. Even though authorities were aware of Lynn's past and present situation, No steps were taken to remove the children from her care. Whether they saw Lynn as someone who needed support and care, and she was just clearly struggling, or they just failed to do their job. Either way, we will be looking into that situation. Tia's life was not an easy one, but she found joy visiting her uncle, 37-year-old John Maiden. He had previously been married and he had a child who was only 2 years younger than Tia. Tia and her uncle both had a passion for the same football team, so they would often chat and watch Manchester United on the TV. On the 3rd of April 2010, Tia's uncle called up Lynn and asked if she would mind sending Tia round to babysit for her cousin. Man United was due to play Chelsea later on in the day, so Tia knew that she was able to watch the game round her uncle's. She arrived at Maiden's house around 3 p.m, and they were chatting about the game that was on later in the day. And then the unimaginable happened. Something that nobody ever saw coming. I can only speculate how her uncle did this. But Tia, not long after arriving round her uncle's, was drugged. I think he must have offered her some kind of drink and then laced it. He laced it with an antipsychotic tranquilizer called olanzapine. Now, this drug was actually prescribed to him from his doctor and would have taken effect on Tia and made her very drowsy and weak indeed. It would be the previous year to this, Maiden began his obsession. He collected an enormous amount of disturbing child images, videos, including violent and sexual content involving children, including snuff films. We have spoke about snuff films previously in another episode, which I covered Georgia Williams, if you remember. Maiden's obsession was not just a sick and disturbing fantasy in his vile little head. This is a need of his, and he needed to bring his obsession to reality, and this is just what happened. Tia was drugged by her uncle she loved and trusted, like we so often hear. He inflicted the most disturbing catalogue of sexual injuries on his 12-year-old niece. Following this, he stabbed her in her stomach, then strangled Tia with his guitar string. All this happened in less than 1 hour of Tia arriving at his house. In fact, it was around 45 minutes, because at 3:45 p.m, John Maiden picks up his phone and dials 999, and the operator answers, and Maiden says, "Hi, I would like to report a murder." The operator asked for the address and what had happened. He replied, "My niece has been murdered by me." The operator then asked, "When did this happen?" And he replied, "I've just finished killing her now." The operator replied, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Because I felt like it." He then wrongly gives Tia's age as 11, and then he said that her name was Tia. Then the call went dead. It was disconnected, but the operator managed to reconnect the call, and then proceeded to ask Maiden for details on what he had done. And he said, "I'm quite sure that the officers that will come to the house will be able to take all the details you will need." The operator said, "How did it happen?" And he said, "I used a knife and strangulation, and that is it. Bye." And he ended the call. Within a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, the police actually arrived at the property at Domain Close in Cheetham Hill. Maiden was waiting for them, and the police said that he was waiting in a suit and he was smoking a cigarette. The police officers described Maiden as chillingly calm. He led the officers upstairs to the spare bedroom. They discovered Tia's naked body laying on the floor face up. She was wearing just her socks. The ligature was still wrapped around her neck, and her hands were tied behind her back. Next to Tia's deceased body were 2 knives, a broom handle, and some sex toys. These were also covered in blood. The police arrested Maiden at the crime scene and later charged him with murder. Tia's mum, auntie, and other relatives arrived at Maiden's home. Neighbours said that Lynn was crying and shouting, why, to the officers. A post-mortem examination revealed that Tia had been stabbed in her stomach, which she obviously lost a large amount of blood from. She had also suffered a severe internal injuries. Tia suffered horrendously while she was still alive. The 45 minutes from arriving at the property to her death would have been unimaginable torture. Further to the autopsy, it was said that Tia's official cause of death was ligature strangulation. An antipsychotic tranquilizer, olanzapine, was found in Tia's blood. The police searched Maiden's property and they found his mobile phone and laptop. The search history shows his sick interest. 2,000 extreme images of children were found, and this was the highest category of abuse. He also searched how to drug a child to prevent them from going into clinical shock or unconsciousness so that he could prolong their torture. His phone and laptop had folders on them, which were labelled as snuff stories, brutal assaults, homicides of children. He downloaded pages from the internet from a book, and this was a kind of how-to do unspeakable crimes to children. And this was among many other disturbing discoveries the police had found. What made Maiden cross over to the dark side is unknown. He hadn't been in trouble with the police for over 20 years, and this was actually for burglary. No one ever suspected him to be a monster that he actually was. He wanted to carry out sex crimes against children. 5 days after Tia's body was discovered, her mum, Lynn, had gone missing. It's believed that she gathered up some of Tia's belongings and left, and she said that she just wanted to be with her daughter. This caused a lot of concern for her mum and her welfare because she was suicidal, and the police launched an urgent appeal for her to be found safe. Lynn was found at her friend's home the following day. The same day, Maiden appeared in court on the 6th of April. He was then remanded in custody, and he was due back in court on Thursday the 8th of April. Standing there, the 37-year-old John Maiden pleaded guilty to the rape and murder of his niece. No jury was needed as he pleaded guilty. In court, Maiden tried to say that he heard voices in his head. One was a good voice and one was a bad voice, but this didn't hold up. Maiden sat in court while the disturbing details of what he had done was read out, and never once did he even seem remotely fazed by anything what was said. It was like someone was just reading a newspaper in front of him. Behind the plastic barrier, screams were heard by the press, and they were coming from Tia's family. On the 4th of October 2010, in court, the judge, Mr. Justice Keith, said, "It is inescapable that Tia Rigg died because you decided to release your fantasies of torturing and killing a young child. It is difficult to know how long this ordeal lasted. The terror, the unimaginable pain you inflicted on her, the indignities you subjected her to while she was still alive. He added, "It was planned, it was premeditated, and her agony must have been prolonged. This is one of those exceptional cases in which the only just punishment requires you to be in prison for the rest of your life. He will never be released, and he will die in prison." Gordon Cole, QC, prosecuting, said, "In general terms, this murder was premeditated. It was murder purely for his sexual gratification. It had a sexual motive. The facts reveal clearly features of torture, rape, physical abuse, and the ultimate murder of a child." Tia's mum, Lynn, is said to have tried to sue social services for not taking her children away from her. She blames that for the fact that Tia died. Councillor John Merry, leader of Salford Council, said, "This is a tragic case and our thoughts remain with the child's family. No one could have predicted what happened to her when she visited her uncle's house that day. But we now know more could have been done during her childhood to support her in coping with her unstable home life. However, even if this child had been removed from the home, she would not have been prevented from having contact with other family members, such as her uncle. There was no indication she was at risk from her uncle, and therefore no reason to stop her from having access to him and other family members of the extended family. Removing her from her home would have therefore not prevented her death." He said that the authorities had taken the review recommendations very seriously, and Ofsted had recognised the improvements has to be made. "But I know we still have a lot of work to do," he said, "and we are committed to continuing to improve the service we provide to protect children and young people living in Salford," he added. Detective Superintendent Mary Doyle, head of the murder inquiry, describes Tia as a happy, normal, healthy 12-year-old girl. She had friends, she socialised normally, and was in the flush of her youth. Tia's parents are separated and they had 3 other children. They were described as devastated and their world was falling apart. Lynn said that when this nightmare happened, it killed me inside. My heart had been broken and will never mend. All that is left is a big empty hole. But now justice has been done. At least Tia can rest in peace." She added that Tia was a bright girl who had her whole life ahead of her. She trusted her uncle and thought she was going to his house to babysit. He not only caused suffering to Tia, but also to her family. He's refused to try and ease some of the pain by telling anyone why he did this, and that he added to their upset. He will now have a long time to reflect on what he had done. Tia was laid to rest in Cheetham at St. James's Church in a horse-drawn carriage, the coffin enclosed in glass. The horses were pulled with pink feathers. Reverend Simon Cook paid tribute to the schoolgirl, saying, "A young life ended too soon. The pain of losing Tia is very raw and very real," he added. Above all else, Tia's heart was for her family, especially her brothers and sisters, who she loved to look after, but also her cousins, her aunties, her uncles, and her grandparents. She was full of energy, full of life, and she was a happy girl, strong-willed, free-spirited, and a bubbly personality with a cheeky smile. The funeral was followed by a private burial, flowers spelling out Tia's name and the word sister, and her nickname Teapot, which was actually another uncle used to call her from the age of 3. They were all taken to the grave. 12 pink balloons were released at her graveside to mark each year that she had on this earth. She was known to child protection agencies, having been placed on child protection registers since the day she was born. She had been the subject of a child protection plan in a number of local authorities, including Salford, where she lived before she died. Maiden was not known to these agencies. The reports found a number of serious failings in the management of this case. 7 chances were missed. These included an over-optimistic and unrealistic perception of Tia's mother, capable to care for her children, allowing the children to remain with the mother 18 months before Tia's death, despite domestic violence and suicide attempts. 7 separate incidents between October 2009 and March 2010, where agencies should have intervened, but failed to do so. Numerous examples where information should have been shared between agencies. The failure to appreciate the growing chaos within the family. Legal proceedings should have been considered to safeguard Tia and her siblings. Information about Tia's mother was not properly analysed to give an understanding of the risk of her children. Lynn's attempt to sue social services failed, but social services failed them too. This was the story of Tia Rigg. Thank you so much for listening. I will be back in the next couple of days with another episode. Much love, everyone, and take care. See you all soon.